The Korean War ran from June 25th of 1950 until July 27th of 1953. During that time, almost 104,000 Americans were wounded and almost 37,000 Americans were killed. I'm Thomas Carroll. Join me while we take a look back at the forgotten faces from a forgotten war. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Forgotten Faces podcast. Today, we are going to welcome the wonderful Susan Kee. She is a Korean American writer, Korean War historian, and advocate for the Korean War veterans and Gold Star families. She has devoted her time to making known the heroes and history of the Korean War, which is often referred to as the Forgotten War. So, hello, Susan. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm really honored to share.
Thank you. So I guess we'll just start off if you want to tell everybody a brief story of your family's past and your past, because you're Korean. So
yes.
And how you got here.
Right. Well, I was born in Korea after the Korean War, but my parents experienced the Korean War. So my dad was about the age of a lot of the Korean War veterans who were fighting the war. He was at that time 18 years old, and my mom was only 9. So they had very different experiences from their perspective just because of their age. But there's also because geographically, they're from different parts of Korea. So my dad's family is from North Korea. His family had lived in Pyongyang, North Korea, which is the capital of North Korea, for many generations. And there were 2 things against them that marked them as enemy of the communists that took over. So for those of you who are not familiar, the North Korean communist dictator, Kim Il-sung, was installed there by the Russians, by Joseph Stalin, as he was trying to expand communism into North Korea. So when Kim Il-sung took over in 1948, life became drastically painful for 2 kinds of people, or people who fit 2 categories. My grandfather and his family fit 2 categories. They were large landowners and also Christian. And communism is absolutely against those 2 kinds of classes. So what happened was my grandfather lost all of his land, and he had quite a sizable amount of land in Pyongyang. He lost it overnight. And his house was big enough to be a high school. So they turned it into some kind of a school. And also, after they lost all of their livelihood, then there was persecution that started against Christians. And what was happening in North Korea was that the communists soldiers would come when people were at worship or prayer service, lock down the church, and burn it to the ground. And so people died as martyrs, burning in these churches, and they were killed alive. So when this was happening all over North Korea, and people don't know that in North Korea, there were a lot of churches before the Korean War. You would never know, right? Because right now it is devoid of religion. That's how communists rule, is that the ruler is the God that people have to bow down to. There is no religious freedom. So anyway, my grandfather decided he needed to get out of North Korea and get his family out. So at that time in 1949, which was a year before the war, the line between North and South Korea was not too difficult to cross. It wasn't heavily mined. So they just escaped on foot with some guides that helped them through hills and mountains. And so they all made it down to South Korea. And then they met at a church called Yongnak Presbyterian Church, where it had been set up as a refuge for North Koreans. It was actually a church set up by North Koreans who had escaped, North Korean Christians. So that's where the family all eventually united. And then they struggled to live with really nothing, except the clothes on their back. And then the war started fairly soon. So then my dad joined the South Korean Republic of Korea's army, and he fought alongside Americans. He was actually attached to the 3rd Infantry Division of the US Army, and he fought throughout the duration of the war. So my dad absolutely has a firsthand experience of the war. I've heard some stories from him, and we absolutely understand what we had been saved from, that kind of communist tyranny of North Korea, especially because of my dad's family's experience of losing everything under communism. Now, my mom's side of the story, she was born in South Korea. I mean, South Korea was never taken over by communists until they invaded. So they didn't really have their lives altered like my dad's side. All she saw was that they invaded, and then the Chinese communists started coming down in March. And I'll just share one short story of something she remembers.
Sure.
She remembers a day when she was on foot, escaping with her family, with their belongings on their back and pushing a cart, trying to get out from the Chinese communists that were coming down to Seoul. And she heard a buzzing of a plane overhead. And she looked up and saw an American star. And when she saw that American star, she thought, wow, the good people are here to save us. And, those are very simple statements or sentiments, but very powerful and true. And to me, it's still true that Americans still go out to fight and die for another people's freedom. And that's something she's never forgotten. And I think a lot of people who are young or Koreans who saw these Americans, brave Americans, come to save them is something they will never forget. So, the Korean War is always thought of as the forgotten war. It's not forgotten to people in Korea who experienced the war. That's something I really want to make clear, is that there's an older generation of Koreans who absolutely will never forget what is owed to America. So that's my mom and dad's story.
Wow, that's a harrowing journey, to say the least, especially getting out of North Korea just in the nick of time.
Right.
It really is.
Right.
And then you, after the war, when you were born, later on,
Yes.
You guys immigrated to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually went to UCLA, and then you worked as, let's see here, project manager in the corporate world.
Yes.
So what got you started then yourself on history and wanting to write about the Korean War?
Well, it's amazing. God can totally change your life in a totally different direction. And that's exactly what happened. I got kind of corporate burnout. I was kind of sick and tired of the corporate politics, middle management stuff. And I just thought, what is the purpose of my life? This doesn't give me joy. I don't feel like it has any meaning or fulfillment. And I thought I had achieved the American dream. People think of American dream as materialistic. And I had thought that too, but then it didn't give me happiness. So I left my corporate job, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to have to figure out my life passion and what I'm here on earth for. So I prayed. And after a lot of soul searching, I realized God was telling me, do something about what you're most grateful for. And then I realized, wow, I'm most grateful I'm not in North Korea. I know what my life could have been, under the thumb of that crazy Kim. And I thought, wow, and who do I owe this to? And I thought, oh my gosh, of course, it's our American Korean War veterans. I've been living in their country. They could have been my neighbors. They could have been my coworkers' fathers. How could I not have realized this debt I owe to them? It was like a huge epiphany. And I thought, well, I'm a Korean. I should have realized this earlier. So I decided to contact Korean War veterans. And there's a lot of Korean War veterans chapters here in Arizona. And I just called them and I said, can I just come and meet you? I just want to thank you. I just come to this really late in life, but I just want to come and meet you and thank you. And they said, yes, sure. And so I went to my first meeting, and I was a mess. I was so emotional. I think I just cried. I couldn't even get words out. It was just so emotional. I thought, wow, these veterans are 80 years old. This was 10 years ago. They were 80 then. Today, they're like 90 plus years old. But they had their walkers and canes and wheelchairs. And I thought, wow, I have missed knowing these heroes earlier. I thought, wow, I hope I'm not too late. But these veterans were so gracious and so open-hearted. And they all came up to me and said, oh, we're so happy to see you. And they started telling me stories and giving me photos, and they were telling me about places in Korea I never even knew. I only knew Seoul. They're telling me things like Ujeongbu and Busan and Incheon. And I'm like, what are all these places? And Heartbreak Ridge, this battle, that. And I'm like, I don't know any of this. And I felt so embarrassed that they knew more about Korea than I did.
Wow.
And, they even had a Korean flag at their chapter meeting. And I thought, wow, how humbled do I feel? These great Americans, almost, these veterans, risked their lives. And there they are honoring my birth country. I owe so much to these veterans, even just for that recognition that they still care about Korea after the hell they went through. This was not an easy war.
No.
So I was just so humbled and so grateful to them. And they became my best friends. And I would go every month and they would just sit down and tell me stories. And I thought, you know what, I better interview them and learn from them as much as I can, and then pass it on. And that's going to be my way of thanking them and making sure their legacy is not forgotten. I don't want these veterans to be forgotten and what they did. So I just started interviewing them and thought I was going to write a book, but then I decided, you know what, I think I better put it on social media. I'll reach more people. So I started sharing a lot of veteran stories and researching the Korean War and putting it out there. And I didn't know if people would be interested. So I started that in 2014.
Yeah, and I've seen your posts before I even started this podcast and follow a lot of them. I can tell you're very passionate about it.
So, well, I started it for a couple of reasons. One, I just wanted America to hear gratitude from Korean people. They need to hear gratitude from the people they sacrificed so much to save. It's one thing for Americans to thank veterans that served abroad, but it's not the same as the people who you fought for coming back to you and saying thank you. And that's what I felt, that I had a responsibility as a Korean person with a Korean face, with the legacy of my family having been saved by Americans. And then also to educate America and Koreans. There's a lot of Koreans in America that don't know anything about the Korean War. I didn't know anything either. Yeah. So I thought, okay, I just got to educate everyone and make sure people understand and appreciate what these veterans did.
Yeah, and if you'd asked me 15 years ago, I don't know if I could have even found Korea on a map.
Yeah.
Until I started researching myself.
Well, I am so grateful to you because you had such a curiosity because of your grandfather who served in the Korean War, and you started this podcast. And I just really have to commend you for that. This takes a lot of work and devotion, and I just wish you all the best. I am sure you're going to be sharing so much of the forgotten hero stories and educating so many people out there. So I totally encourage you, and I'm so happy to see you do this work. And I welcome anyone who wants to help, the public understand more about the Korean War. So you're an important part of that too.
Thank you. And it's so interesting and it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable because I've always been a history nut myself anyway. So.
Yeah, and actually, this is not work for me. I mean, I dreaded going to my corporate job. I love this every day, talking to veterans and researching Korean War. I just absolutely love it. This is absolutely what I needed to do, and I'm so grateful for the change that God made in my life.
That's great. So we were talking just before we started. We were gonna tell one of your favorite stories.
Yes.
So we decided on Peter Griffin, who was a paratrooper.
Yes, actually, Peter Griffin is the living brother. John Griffin is the paratrooper that was killed. I'm sorry, I needed to clarify that.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yes.
That was me not making very clear notes.
No, that's okay. I think I maybe gave you the wrong name. So John T. Griffin was the paratrooper with the 187th Regimental Combat Team. And he was actually killed March 25th, 1951, which was yesterday, 71 years ago. And there is quite a powerful story to this. I guess if I could share that with you, I'll show you the picture.
Certainly.
Okay. So here is a post that I had put on my Facebook page, and you'll see the first picture here is of Mr. Peter Griffin in South Korea on a hill, approximately where his brother, John T. Griffin, in that portrait, was killed on March 25th, 1951. March 25th, 1951 was Easter Sunday. These paratroopers were dropped on Good Friday, and 2 days later, he was killed. And from everything that we have researched, on the night of the March 25th, Easter Sunday, it was raining, it was muddy. They were fighting in these hilly areas where you couldn't see anything at night. They were fighting against Chinese communists. And 9 paratroopers lost their life in this particular area, along with John T. Griffin. But I'll go back a little bit to how we got here. So this was in 2018, April, that I and Mr. Griffin and some other families, Gold Star families, made their voyage to Korea. But his story really starts when he was 4 years old. Mr. Peter Griffin, that's kneeling there. When he was 4 years old, he remembers a steel casket being rolled into his living room. And that was his older brother that he absolutely admired and loved so much, being rolled in a casket from Korea. And so they were having a wake in their house, and he was shocked. He didn't know what to think of it. All they said was, John's in there and he was killed in Korea. So he went up to the casket, he told me, and he touched the cold steel of that casket. And he said to him, John, are you in there? What happened to you? I'm going to get those guys. I'm going to go fight them. And as a 4-year-old who absolutely idolized this amazing young man, a brave paratrooper who went to Korea, never expected to be talking to his brother that way. And so Mr. Griffin grew up, and he became a paratrooper himself, and followed in the footsteps of his brother. And he fought in Vietnam. And he was also very highly decorated. I think he has a Bronze Star, Mr. Griffin. So anyway, fast forward, Mr. Griffin is somebody I met through my Facebook page. And he said, my brother was killed in Korea. And I said, oh, I am so sorry. You know, I'm so heartbroken. And I kept in touch with him. And I found out that there was a trip to Korea for families who lost loved ones. And I said, Mr. Griffin, would you like to go to Korea? He said, I would love to. And he said, Susan, can I ask you something? Do you think we could find that hill where my brother was killed? And I said, you know what? If God wills it, it will happen. Let's try. So I contacted a colonel I know, a US Army colonel that lives in Korea. He wrote multiple books on the DMZ. And so he knows this DMZ area. This is by the demilitarized zone, right by the 38th parallel that separates North and South Korea. So I contacted Colonel Tharp and I said, can you help us find where this hero might have been killed? You know, he was brought home, but his brother's lifelong wish is to see where his brother was. And I did ask Mr. Griffin, why do you want to go to that place? You know, it might be very painful for you. And he said, I just want to see what my brother last saw before he died. It just absolutely broke my heart. So, with Colonel Tharp's help, he did a lot of research on mapping, you know, Korean War maps and Google Earth. And he even scouted out this place a couple of times before we came. He lives in Korea, and he took us out there. And so this is him driving us over to the area and over some hilly areas. And here's some maps that he had done research on. And actually, it was really hard to go up and down. Maybe it's because I'm a woman, but I can't imagine these guys fighting this hill at night with all these trees and in the way and mud and water and rain. I just cannot imagine how they could have seen anything to fight. So this is a really dense area. And we think it's approximately around this area. And what's interesting is this is actually like a little grave cemetery. Now, these are Koreans that are buried there. But we thought, wow, this is kind of a peaceful area now where these people rest. But do they know of the Americans that shed their blood there? And so we went and we set up on this one hill that looked beautiful under this tree, his portrait that he had received from the Korean government. This portrait was presented to the families that went on the Korea trip to honor their loved one. And we took that there and we placed the American flag and we said a prayer. And I cannot tell you how incredibly emotional this was for him and for me. You know, can you imagine? I am alive because his brother died and saved my family. There's a very direct connection between Gold Star families and I. It is not something I feel as somebody else's loss. It is directly something they sacrificed so that I could have my life. And, you know, what's really incredible is when I was standing on that hill, I almost felt the blood rushing under my feet of these paratroopers that had given their blood and their life for me to stand there as a free South Korean. So, you know, when I go to Korea now, knowing of heroes like John Griffin and all these Korean War veterans who tell me where they fought, when I look upon hills and mountains, I kind of see their faces. I don't see landscape. I see these American heroes' faces when I look upon Korea, because their sacrifice was made there, and they fought on those hills and mountains for us. So, so knowing veterans and Gold Star families has totally changed how I see my own country that I was born in.
Wow, and I can see there in the picture that it's beautiful, which I will share these on the blog as well. Now you mentioned Gold Star families.
Yes.
So for anybody who might not know what a Gold Star family is, maybe if you could tell us briefly what it is. I actually had to look it up myself a couple days ago.
Yes. Gold Star family is a category of families who have lost loved ones in a war. So it could be a brother, a mother, a father of the hero, or children. But usually immediate family is referred to as Gold Star family. So Mr. Peter Griffin is a Gold Star family member because he's a sibling of a fallen hero from a war. So that Gold Star family designation is for every war, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. So that's the terminology. I'm so glad that you asked that, because I take these terminologies for granted, and I didn't know what they meant either before. Only because of veterans and families, I've learned all these things. So I guess I'm starting to take it for granted too.
I had never noticed before. I had to look it up myself. But,
right.
So that kind of leads into, you do a ton of work as well for POW MIAs, which there's 7,000 some MIAs yet from the Korean War. 7,000
something. So let me share a couple slides. I did a presentation recently to another group, and maybe the diagrams might help. So let me see if I can get there and get you to this topic. Okay, so this is my Facebook page for those of you who may be interested in checking it out. I am so grateful for everyone who has interest in the Korean War. It's taken a long time to build an audience, but I am so grateful for every one of them who has an interest. This is just a quick slide I wanted to show of when the Korean War occurred. It occurred when the North Korean communists invaded South Korea on June 25th, 1950, and it lasted until June 27, 1953. 3-year war, but huge amount of casualties. I'll go right to that. 36,000 Americans were killed, over 8,000 became missing. And today there's roughly still 7,675 unaccounted for. And 5,300 of them are in North Korea. And I'll show you a map. These are all POW camps they had during the war. And, right here is the border of North Korea and China. This is the Yalu River right here, where my mouse is at. And so the POW camps were intentionally put way north so that it didn't give any hope for these prisoners to escape, and get away. Even if they did escape, they would be caught and, easily identifiable as non-Korean and thrown back. And so a lot of the POWs that I've interviewed told me that they didn't even, think to escape. And of course, they were starved practically to death. So many were starved to death, and they didn't have the energy or the strength to even try to escape, this long path to South Korea.
Right. And the terrain up there is just brutal terrain even.
Yes, it's very mountainous. Yes. So let's talk about the POWs, and we want to talk about the POWs and MIAs. So right now, this is where our missing in action are in North Korea. So about 5,300 are still missing. A lot of them are in POW camps where they died of starvation or injuries not being cared for. There was no medical treatment whatsoever, if you can imagine that. These were not POW camps by standard conventions of war, where you treat POWs with a certain standard of, meals or health, just medical treatment, none whatsoever. They were totally starved to death. There was no medical treatment. These were really death camps. These were death camps. They were just taken there to die, pretty much. And so many died in the prison camps. And so they're buried somewhere along the POW camps there. These are some battle sites that happened where there were some large casualties at Battle of Unsan, Kunuri. And then on the right, Chosun Reservoir is another big battle area where the Marines and the 7th Infantry of the Army were fighting against Chinese, 10 divisions of Chinese communists. And then there were some cemeteries where those that were killed were buried, but then they were not brought out. So this is a really difficult situation for families who have lost loved ones that are still in North Korea. And with, Crazy Kim holding them hostage, even after he has killed them, these families have very little hope. And these are some of the families. I meet them in Washington, D.C. They have a meeting every year where the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency briefs them on their efforts to recover our missing and identify them. And as you can see, there is just a lot of exasperation and hopelessness on the faces of these families. Some of them are this lady here in the front, Lois Moore. She's actually a widow of a U.S. Air Force captain who was shot down. He was flying a P-51 Mustang over Yellow River. He was shot down by MiGs, and he's still missing. This is his daughter he left behind. She was just a baby. There's just so many stories of loss and sacrifice. So when I meet these families, it is just really indescribable how sorry I feel for their pain and how much they sacrifice so that I can be there. So I go to these meetings to show them that I am grateful as a Korean person who has been saved by someone in their family who has given their life. And I go there to also learn their story so that I can become better advocates and educate people about the fact that there are families that are still fighting this war. Every day they wonder, what happened to my loved one? Was he in pain? Did he suffer? Where is he? All these questions haunt them. So they have never left the Korean War behind, as some can. If you have your loved ones returned home, they don't have that. But one thing I do want to talk about is something really amazing that happened in 2018. President Trump negotiated with North Korea's dictator and was able to bring back from North Korea 55 caskets of remains of Americans. These are all Korean War heroes that had died somewhere in North Korea 70 years ago. And in 2018, they were brought home. And from the agency, Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, they tell us these 55 caskets represent about 210 heroes that they have yet to identify. But they're matching their DNA of these families to these bones. And one of them is a family I know. This is Major Storms. He was in one of these caskets. This is Major Storms. He was a U.S. Army Texas A&M graduate, Corps Cadets. He had fought under Patton in World War II in Italy and North Africa. He was a commander of a battalion trying to break out of the Battle of Chosun in North Korea, and he was killed. And he had left behind four young sons. One was yet to be born. And this was his family when he went off to Korea. So he had 3 young sons, and she was pregnant. And so the baby boy that was born after he was killed or went missing never knew his father. And so, this is really what sacrifice looks like to me. I have no words. I have no actions that will ever match what they have sacrificed for me. And so I have the honor of knowing this beautiful family, and we went to bury him at Arlington last July. This is his beautiful military honors funeral. And this is his 4 brothers here, you see on the left. I'm sorry, his 4 young sons who are now in their 70s and above. It's been over 70 years. And this is Mr. Sam Storms, the oldest son. And, they're so grateful. They're such a gracious family. They said, we never expected him to be found, but we never lost hope. And we always prayed for his return. And they thank God for this miraculous return that they never expected. And so I was there. And this is a major general of the South Korean Military Defense Attaché. He's attached to the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C., and he came out to pay respects to this American hero. And the only reason I show this picture is I want people to see the direct relationship between American sacrifice and Koreans living in freedom. that major general and I are just two people of millions of Koreans who live in freedom because of this hero. And so that's the only reason I show that picture. And it was the most incredible honor. And it continues to be an honor to know this amazing family. And they are so proud of their father, you know, despite all the pain they have suffered not having him in their life.
I couldn't imagine that. I couldn't even begin to imagine that.
Right.
That's a great and a heartbreaking story all at once.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm glad that he was returned, but there's so many still have yet to be returned, and hopefully that can be changed in the future. But
Right. And, you know, I share the story of major storms so that we can put a face to these 5,300 that are missing.
Right.
That's just one of 5,300 still missing in North Korea. But when you hear the story, you know, the pain becomes real, right? You know, you kind of have an idea of 5,300 people or those many heroes missing, but you hear a story and it just takes on another level of depth.
yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
It's so now you were also showing me pictures too here beforehand. We'll turn it in maybe a happier direction even.
Mm-hmm.
Of Korea today, before and
yes,
after
okay.
pictures of Korea
Right, so
today.
let's go there. Okay. Actually, before we go to Korea today, I'd like to talk a little bit, one more thing about the fallen, something
Sure.
that's very important that's coming up in July. And this is our Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., as you know. And, you know, for the longest time, we just had these statues and the wall there of faces etched on the side of, you know, troops that fought in Korea. But there was never a wall memorializing the 36,000 Americans who gave their life in Korea. You know, again, forgotten, right? I mean, these heroes have been forgotten. Their names have never been out there. Well, we're going to change that in July. There's going to be a wall of remembrance dedicated in July 27th, 2022. And right now, they're actually installing these engraved panels of names of these heroes. And so these families will finally get the honor and recognition for their loved one's sacrifice. So we are expecting a very large dedication ceremony, somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 people. I'm currently helping on the planning committee, and they will actually live stream from the site the entire dedication ceremony. So I'll share that with you, Thomas, if you want to share that with your audience, and they'll be able to watch the entire dedication. And this will probably be very historic and something, probably nothing else will match the magnitude of this happening in July. So I wanted to make sure that people know about it. And if there's families out there that are listening to this who are Gold Star families, please go to KoreanWarVetsMemorial.org and look for this information. And please register or put in an interest form so that you can be invited. So we are trying to get as many Gold Star families invited to this, because this memorial is for them. It is for their loved one's sacrifice. And it will be a beautiful memorial so that these heroes are never forgotten. So that's how the circular area is going to look under there with a wall. Okay, so now I want to get to what you had asked. I'm sorry, I took a little detour.
No, that's perfect.
So people might ask, well, that was a lost war. The war ended exactly where we started. Why does the Korean War matter? Well, I will give you a personal perspective. The Korean War mattered because communism was stopped in its tracks. North Korean communists tried to spread communism and take over all of South Korea. America and everyone who responded to stop that succeeded. They saved South Korea. I am sitting here across from you, Thomas, and I am the evidence of their victory. How could I be sitting here if South Korea was lost to communists? I wouldn't even know what the internet is.
Yeah, just what the government tells you is. That's it.
I would not have any freedoms that I have come to know and cherish every day. And so I want to show you, this is the really kind of the before and after and the result of the Korean War. So this was Seoul, all bombed out. This is the capital of South Korea. This is Seoul today. It is absolutely a miracle. This is a victory. I don't see how people could call this a lost war. And I hate it when people say that was a lost war. How could it be lost if I'm free?
That's true.
It would, if we had lost it, I would be under communist thumb of Crazy Kim. This is U.S. Marines, 1st Marine Division fighting in Seoul. They're trying to get Seoul back after they made the Incheon landing. This is about end of September 1950. They're raising the American flag on the U.S. Embassy at the time. It's a Korean building. And then here's Seoul today. This is Incheon, where a famous amphibious landing took place. That was a huge victory in the Korean War that turned the tide of the war for the Americans. And this helped us push communists out of South Korea. And this was a very scary landing. They didn't know what to expect. They didn't know whether this would be like a Normandy. But here's Incheon today. Oh, I'll tell you a quick story here, actually. I know one of the veterans who were on these landing crafts, Mr. Graham, and he was making this approach with his friend, Clyde Queen. They were from San Diego, Camp Pendleton, and they don't know what to expect here. All they are probably thinking is Normandy, right? In their minds, that was 5 years before this, during World War II. Or I'm sorry, that was 1944, right? That was 6 years before this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they made this landing, and in 2013, we are about to land at Incheon Airport. We went to Korea together on a Korea Revisit program that the Korean War veterans are honored and invited by the Korean government. So we were on a plane making our approach to Incheon Airport. And I told Mr. Graham and Mr. Queen, Mr. Graham, did you ever think you would make another Incheon landing? This time by air, not by sea. He started laughing. And then we came out here after we got our bags, and he looked around this airport and he said, Susan, are you sure this is Seoul? Are you sure this is Incheon? Are you sure this is Korea? He couldn't believe it. It was just dirt and everything was bombed out, in 1950. And here we are in 2013. And I said, yes, sir, it is South Korea. This is what you saved and made possible for us. And he just about cried. He just could not even speak. And that is really the legacy of our Korean War veterans, is this is what they made possible for us. These heroes, this is what they fought to give us. And we can never thank them enough. This is Han River. A lot of their 1st Marines actually crossed this river to get into Seoul to fight the communists and push the communists out. So they made this crossing during the war. This is the crossing. I'm sorry. This is the crossing of the Han River. This is Han River today. Back then during the war, there was only one bridge and it was bombed out. Today, there's 29 bridges across this. And I took this picture from top of a 123-story high building. And you could look across all of Seoul. And when you look at this spread out, flourishing city, I just thank God and I thank our American heroes. That is who I think for this.
Yeah, it looks like LA.
Oh, it's much bigger than LA when you look around. In terms of the population, the density of population is, I think, like 12 million people in Seoul. It's amazing. And this is the building I went to the top of to take that picture. So I would highly recommend for anyone who traveled to Korea, check this out. This is the Lotte World Tower. It's only $20 to go all the way to the top. And you could kind of look around, all around panoramic view of Seoul. And it is absolutely incredible. And, our Korean War veterans have so much to be proud of. And this is their legacy. So this is Busan. This is where they all came in on the southern port when they arrived in Korea at the beginning of the war. This is Busan today. Absolutely a miracle. And this is one thing I really want to emphasize here is, it is not a forgotten war to me, because, our family lived through this and we have not forgotten the sacrifice of Americans. But it is also a forgotten victory. People think it was a lost war. It wasn't lost. Look at South Korea. Look at North Korea there in the dark, and you see a little bit of light on Pyongyang right here. You see that? That's the only place that has any electricity at night. So look at it's all lit up. And so this, to me, is really the difference between forces of darkness, which is communism, and forces of good in the world, which is democracy and freedom. And today there's big companies like Hyundai, Samsung, LG, Kia, people don't know during the war, people did not even know what cars look like. We didn't have cars back then. Americans had, Studebakers or whatever they were, driving. Here, Korea didn't know what cars looked like. We had carts we were pushing. We had animals to do farming with. There was no machinery. And so the fact that Hyundai and Kia and Samsung are making these cars and computers and TVs is just really an incredible testament to our Korean War veterans and what they have allowed us to become. And this is all thanks to America and American veterans and those families who gave their loved ones to fight for us and save us. So it is a forgotten victory.
That's well put. It's and nobody thinks about that. You just see the history books. It says that they signed the armistice and that was that. But yeah, that's an amazing transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So what's next for Susan Kee now? Let's talk about you. What's next for you?
I don't like talking about myself too much, other than what I'm working on that is meaningful for other people. So this dedication ceremony I talked about at the Korean War Veterans Memorial, I'm working on that right now. And so we're inviting Gold Star families and Korean War veterans and a huge delegation from Korea, the Korean government, military, the South Korean president, US president will be there. So this is going to be a massive ceremony, but really, this is really for the families who have never gotten recognition. And, your show, you said you want to highlight the forgotten heroes. These are the forgotten heroes, the guys who have gave their lives, the guys who are still missing in North Korea that have yet to come home. And so I really appreciate the title and the purpose of your podcast is to make people understand who these heroes were, that they were real people, that they were fathers or someone's brother, like, Mr. Griffin's brother, that, he absolutely idolized and looked up to and didn't get to, live their lives together, side by side as brothers. He never got that. And he lost out on that. So I just want to call attention to the fact that this dedication will happen in July. And I am doing this out of my loving gratitude for these families. And I want to do everything I can to honor them appropriately in July. And I hope it's really meaningful for them and brings them healing. Even though they may not have their loved ones home, this wall of remembrance will be their gravestone. That's the only thing that marks their sacrifice and their loved one's name. That is so important to give them that. So that's, I guess, what's literally next for me. Beyond that, every day, it's something God opens doors to, like I didn't know who you were and you reached out to me on Facebook and I have this great opportunity to speak to your audience. So every day I just pray and I ask God, show me what you want me to do, because this was his idea. I had no idea of Korean War. I'm a very unlikely candidate. I'm a woman. I mean, what I know about military, I'm not a veteran. I never studied military history in my life. I didn't know a battalion from a division or a regiment. I mean, I had no idea. I didn't know what an M1 was or a T-34 tank, a Russian tank. But these are all things that veterans have really shared with me that I have just really learned from, because I want their experiences to matter and I want their experiences to be carried on and told. So it's become really something I'm grateful to God for every day that I can do this. And I don't know what lies ahead other than what God may know. So I just look to God every day and try to do what I know he wants me to do, which is to thank America and to thank these families and these veterans who gave me my life. And every day I'm grateful for my life.
Excellent. And you do such great work. Like I said, I follow your Facebook page. So
well, thank you. But it took a long time. I didn't know what I was doing when I started my Facebook. I didn't even know how to do Facebook, actually. I had to learn that. And I guess.
And I think more history of Korean War than I do.
It doesn't really matter. You know what? This is why I wanted to do this podcast with you, because I love the fact that you have a passion for this. And it doesn't matter when you start or where you start. It matters that you do it, you know. And that Facebook page I have, yeah, sure, I may have a lot of people following me now, but you know, when I first started, I barely got 1 or 2 likes on any of my posts. Nobody was looking at it. And I'm like, but I just kept on doing it because it's something I felt was important, and it didn't matter who was looking, you know. It's something in my heart. It's something I want to do. And if other people recognize it and find it, great. But I was going to do it anyway. And you're doing that too. Yeah. You're just starting out your podcast.
Just starting. Yeah. This is.
Yeah. And you're doing it no matter what, you know, and no matter what the audience size is, I encourage you to keep at it because it's important. And I so appreciate, you know, just you're asking me to be on the show and share my story. But it's really, I hope I shared more about the Korean War hero stories than my own, because without them, I'm not here. I don't have a story without them. Yeah.
And that's just what's so amazing about it. So, Susan, I thank you very much for your time. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I will make sure to share all those pictures and links and everything on the blog when we release the episode. So thank you again so much.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas. I just encourage you to keep up the great work that you have started. And if there's anything I could do to help you, please let me know. And God bless you for doing this. We certainly need people to know about the Korean War and to appreciate all the heroes that fought in it and gave their lives.
I agree. And thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Take care.
You too.
Thank you.
I would again like to thank Susan Kee for joining us on today's podcast. You can find her Facebook page at facebook.com/Susan Kee Writer. You can also find her biography, all the pictures she shared with me, and links at forgottenfacespodcast.wordpress.com.